Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 34, Mischief Unmanaged. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're going to talk about the story told in season 1 of the Loki television series. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing mostly pretty good. It's a little hectic over here. I'm in the middle of packing for a move and also trying to get my book released. So everything kind of came to head at the same time. But otherwise good. It's still in good spirits. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. It is autumn here. We're starting to get temps in the 40s and the trees are changing, and it feels like the appropriate time for us to start talking about the god of mischief. So that's kind of going to be fun.
Excellent. Nice. No, we're just barely coming out of summer. It's still really warm. We're getting 90s days. But we've had some cooling off, and it looks like it's going to be cooling off again. So that's good.
And what's new in your writing world? You are getting ready to publish. As a matter of fact, by the time this podcast airs, Zara will be published, won't it?
Yes. The first book will be out in the world. The Golden Scarab of Ballyhar. Yes, it will be out. Paper book will be out. And it will be an ebook. And it will be in Kindle Unlimited. Also working on getting the paper book to a wider set of stores than just Amazon. I'm not sure. Well, no, that won't be done probably by the time this airs. But I'm working on that. Maybe in a couple weeks that'll be ready to go.
Awesome. And we will have a link to a live link to Zara in the show notes. So folks want to check out Mike's first book, you can click on that link and go check it out. That's going to be so exciting.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do a launch party after I get the move done and everything.
Count me in.
All right. We'll do a virtual party too. What about you? What's going on in your writing world?
Completed another chapter in Ecliptic that's available on Patreon. It's a draft chapter. I realized what was slowing me down a little bit in this, and it usually is always kind of the same thing. I mean, we've talked about this before, so people who have listened to our podcast regularly will have heard me say this. I am a bit of a plantser. I like to have a sort of 30,000 foot level plot, know where I'm starting and know where I want to end. But I frequently allow the story to tell itself in the middle. That works best for me. And so this particular segment of the story where I have one of the main characters, Fulgar, having been captured by the Cold War enemy in this story, he's in prison, and I've been working through his experience in this prison. And I kind of was laughing to myself because for the most part, I kind of know what plots I'm working with when I do various segments of the story, but I hadn't really mapped out a prison and prison escape plot for myself. So I've been kind of just winging it. But I think the winging is good. I'm really happy with the way it's going. So the next chapter is going to be the escape itself, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to writing that. And then I finished editing the second book in my time travel series. It's the Temporal Protection Course series. It's a 4-book series plus a prequel novella and an origin story. And so the second book in the series arc itself, I've finished all of the audio editing that's now available on YouTube. And then in the next couple of weeks, I will take all those individual chapters and convert them into a long form audiobook, which will probably be about 6 hours. And if you remember from last time I did the long form audiobook for book 1, it was quite the endeavor. So I'm prepared.
Yeah, it's quite an undertaking.
The world's longest download. Have you encountered anything interesting in books or movies or television in the last week?
I'm just working through Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I finished the second season of that.
Wasn't it amazing?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I was a little concerned about their musical episode, how that was going to play out, but I like the way they set it up. I won't say anything specific in case listeners haven't seen it. And I thought they handled it pretty well. And I like the end. Of course, we end sort of on a cliffhanger. Well, not sort of. We end on a cliffhanger this year. Everything's kind of dark. I'm interested to see where it goes and where it picks up next season.
Yeah, me too. Which may be sooner than we hoped because the writer's strike has ended. As of yesterday, they're back to work as of yesterday. So we're recording this at the end of September, and the writers came to an agreement with the studios yesterday. So now we're just waiting for the actors to come to an agreement with the studios, and hopefully that will be soon.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear about the writing. I guess they can get writing going, and then hopefully, like you said, hopefully the actors' strike will be resolved, and they can get back to full production on things.
We have actually started watching the old original Twilight Zone series. My offspring wanted to see it, so it's available on Amazon through our Paramount subscription. So we've been watching episodes of that. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that original Twilight Zone, they have some great story ideas. And it's nice because, they're all like, 20 minutes long or something, 25 minutes. They're really short. Yeah. They get in and out, and, they some interesting sci-fi ideas there. There's a lot of interesting moral stories and dilemmas that are brought up. Just some weird things that are really fun. They did a good job.
And they still work.
Yeah.
The first episode, which is pretty famous, was written by Rod Serling, and it's about a man who is in isolation to try to see how humans would do going to the moon. A decade before we actually went to the moon. It's interesting how we were already talking about it in the 50s. And so that was the only one so far that hasn't really held up, simply because the technology changed. And of course, how could they predict the technology? So that was it. But other than that, the stories have been really good.
Yeah, I would watch them. They'll usually do, or they used to do a run of those. I don't know if it was Sci-Fi Channel or what, around like Thanksgiving time, I think.
Oh, yes.
They would run it like 24 hours a day for like a week or something, and I would always hop in and catch them. But it's cool that it's on Paramount now. That's great.
Are you ready to talk about the story told in Loki Season 1?
I am. Let's get to it.
Today we're talking about the story told in Season 1 of the television series Loki. And I'm going to read the synopsis, which is available on the Google Knowledge panel when you type Loki in on Google. Loki, the god of mischief, steps out of his brother's shadow to embark on an adventure that takes place after the events of Avengers Endgame. So did you like this series, Mike?
I did. I thought it had a lot of fun things in it. It was very different than kind of maybe what one would expect coming off of Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame. But I think that helped, right? We don't need to see more of the movie. I want to see a different aspect of the world that the MCU had created for the MCU. So I thought there was a lot of interesting things that were going on in here. I liked kind of the setup that they had for it. They pulled us out from the movie. They gave us that opening scene, and then boom, we're into the world of the Loki TV show. I love how the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, I think is what it was sort of this old-timey bureaucracy. It's like they had all this high-tech stuff, but like the face of everything kind of felt like from, decades ago. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting things that they did with the plot, right? I like a lot of the twists that they came up with. The idea of hiding out, camping, living at the end of the world in moments in different places. I thought that was very clever, how he could be there and it didn't affect anything really because everything was going to get wiped out there anyway. I thought that was a very clever idea. The Mobius character, I like the way he's set up. I like the way Owen Wilson plays him and how he relates to Loki, how he sort of gives him a chance. He's willing to let him run a little bit, but at the same time keep an eye on him. He's not getting the wool pulled over his eyes. He knows what's going on. I like that. Yeah, all the twists were cool, right? The other Loki is a woman. They find out that the TVA employees are being lied to about being created. Then that they're all variants. We find out that the timekeepers are actually just props and puppets, essentially, these androids that are just there with someone else behind the scenes. Very sort of Wizard of Ozzy type thing. We find out that the pruning doesn't immediately kill someone. And then at the very end, Mobius doesn't know who Loki is. So they do a lot of twists in the story, which you're not really expecting because they're going along pretty quick from one thing to the next. And it keeps it interesting. And I think that was the main thing in the show is they kept it interesting throughout. It's different. It's kind of weird. It's not like the Thor movies or the Avengers. So they're taking a risk with this show, much like they did with WandaVision. So I like that. And I like that we get to see a little bit more into what makes Loki tick, a little bit into his psyche and his background and, what he feels about the people around him. And we get to see him, theoretically at least, change over the course of the show, which was interesting. I thought it was funny that the only other person who Loki can love, being a narcissist, is himself, essentially. Thought that was funny. And I like that Loki and Mobius became friends by the end of it. I like that Loki got to help enchant the storm monster. We see him sort of grow his abilities over the course of the story, which was interesting. I wasn't expecting that. You kind of figure he's a god, he has these powers, and that's it. But then he finds out, wait, there's these other versions of me who are more powerful or who can do different things, and it helps him grow in a sort of a physically manifest way. So I thought that was interesting too. And then I like at the end how it's left open and foreboding. We kind of talked about that with Strange New Worlds a minute ago. The same thing at the end of this episode. You're like, things are not good. So I'm curious to see where this next season will go that's coming up. The MCU kind of touched upon the same character in, what was it, the Ant-Man Quantumania, I think. But it seemed a little bit disconnected from the person we see here, who remains. So yeah, I'm interested to see where this goes. I would say generally overall, I liked it. I was positive on it. And I'm interested to see where we head next time. How about you? Did you like it overall? What did you like if you did?
Liked it. Actually, watching it the second time, better. I liked it the first time, watching it the first time, very much. I liked how they were, like you just said, being very kind of experimental with the television series, kind of going off in different directions with different storytelling. I mean, our Marvel movies are pretty straightforward plots. Good, and sometimes incredibly complex, but still pretty straightforward plots. This one, I was never sure where it was going because of the twists and turns that you mentioned. And I enjoyed that. But I also sometimes felt a little overwhelmed because I enjoy trying to figure out what's going to happen next, and I could not figure out what was going to happen next in this series. Every time I think I had it, something happened, and I was like, whoop, off in the direction. Wow, I have no clue what's going on here. There was so much character development, so much world building that was in place. It was sometimes felt a little overwhelming. And I didn't have that problem watching it the second time. The second time I was actually able to sit back and really enjoy it and realize this is a brilliant series. I like the mystery at it, and there's a lot of mystery. There are layers of mystery here, and you're constantly peeling back the layers to discover another mystery, and I really like that. The writing is tight, the action is tight, it moves along really well. Very little not to like here. The other thing I think that helped me appreciate this second viewing was that some of the series that came after this in the Marvel Universe were not so well developed. They did not have the same kind of, it didn't appear to have the same kind of character development and the same kind of world building that this and WandaVision had. And so then to come back to this series and be able to sink my teeth into it after not being able to do that in other following series was also really good. It made me really appreciate all the work that went into this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing for me, I think their post Endgame TV shows, well, I guess they started the TV shows after that, for me have been better than the movies. I think a lot of the movies have failed in some pretty spectacular ways, unfortunately, mostly resulting from just poor writing. It's like someone did a first draft and they just made a movie off of it without seeing all the inconsistencies and things like that. And while I think there's some of that here as well, I think it holds together a little better. And like you said, there's a lot of mystery. And a lot of world building things that are there, and it's really hard to predict where this story is going to go because it kind of throws you off balance right from the beginning. Where is he? What's happening? And it kind of maintains that throughout, which I think is enjoyable and consistent for the show.
Yeah. So, is there anything that you might have done differently as a writer with this show?
A number of little things that I noticed watching it through again, some little inconsistencies that they had, so maybe some world building things that didn't quite connect. The first thing I noticed, again, because I'm watching it the second time, it's not something I caught first time through. If the TVA is hunting this Loki variant, right? Thinking, wouldn't they already know who this character is? Wouldn't they know that it's a woman? And yeah, and we find out later, in fact, they do. they caught her as a girl, and they should know that this is a female that they're hunting, right? Or if, there's multiple of them out there loose, and they don't know which one is this one, they should have mentioned that. I think just saying that, oh, there's a few of them loose, and one of them is doing this, right? Or multiple or something, I don't know, but that seemed like a bug in the script. Like, oh, we don't know if this is a male or female, because they keep referring to the Loki as a he and a him, but they should know that it's a she because she was caught by them before and got loose. So I thought that was like they were trying to make a cool reveal with their reveal, leading us to believe, oh, it's another male Loki, and then it's not, it's a woman. It's like, which that's fine. But then don't show that you already caught this person before and knew that it wasn't a woman, or knew that it was a woman. So that was one thing. And then one thing I wasn't sure, I have to think about this maybe some more, because as I was watching it, I was like, so just existing causes a branch in the timeline? That doesn't seem to make sense. Like, she was just born basically and was a child, and they caught her playing with a toy, not doing anything. That seemed weird. I don't know. The He Who Remains character, what was his name? Kang, I think. Is that what he was?
Yeah, I think that he is to be Kang the Conqueror.
Kang the Conqueror, right? Yeah. So it's like he just thought at one point, like, oh wait, we should capture that girl because it leads to this other thing. But like, wouldn't they have already known that earlier? And like some of that grabbing of people out of their timelines seems like the explanation didn't make sense to me. This Loki I get, because he's, he gets the Tesseract and he's zipping through time and space, and he's supposed to go in this other path. He did something that I could see, okay, that could cause a problem with the timeline. But the other people, including like everyone living their lives at the TVA apparently, just seem to be existing, doing their thing, and they were pulled out of their timeline for not a particular reason. So like that never really got explained at the end, other than I guess he just sees where they're all going to go. It's not necessarily that they do something, and they deserve punishment for that or whatever. It's just, oh, them being here causes a problem. So I would have liked them to have explained that a little bit at the end, at least just touched upon it.
And maybe season 2.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, maybe in season 2.
I think that he's pulling all the Lokis out because he's seen that the Lokis can cause his downfall.
Yeah, the Lokis seem to be particular, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of Lokis. And I think it's anyone that he sees who could it's almost like an echo of, remember the plot in Winter Soldier, Captain America Winter Soldier, where they had the algorithm that picked out anyone who could be a threat to Hydra. I'm kind of thinking that's my theory. It's kind of like that. Anyone who could be a threat to Kang in the future, he has the TVA pull. And that's why he created the TVA. That's why they exist. That's my theory. Anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you've got these lords of mischief and chaos out there. They can definitely cause trouble with your plan. Yeah, I mean, anytime you're talking multiversal things like that, interdimensional stuff, it can get so complicated to keep track of that. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's just like, well, the simplest way to deal with this, just at any hint of trouble with these Lokis in particular, we get them out of there. Could be. The Lokis on Lamentus, right? The male and female Loki, the main characters. They supposedly created this significant branch when they were looking at each other, sort of longingly. To me, that didn't make sense, because had the TVA not come in, they both would have died anyway. Which, according to the rules they set up, it shouldn't have caused a branch or any kind of notice, because they were there at one of these end of time moments for that world. So I didn't quite get that. Like, that wouldn't have been an issue had they just not shown up. I'm not sure how they could have handled that differently, but it was something that I noticed. I get that they wanted to end that episode on like a dark cliffhanger where it's like, oh, it looks like they're doomed, right? And then the next episode, they kind of get saved by the TVA. But maybe they could have made it so they were about to get away in the Ark or something and screw up the timeline, and then the TVA comes in. I don't know, something. It just seemed like it broke their own rule that they made up. And then I guess overall, I think, well, let me skip to this other specific point first. I wish at the end, kind of one of the climactic moments where they're trying to enchant the big dark storm cloud beast, whose name I forget. I wish Loki's learning of that enchantment was tied to some personal growth or learning some specific thing, rather than just him being able to do it all of a sudden. It's like, okay, it's time for him to do it now, and he has the ability. I never really liked that, especially in climactic moments. It's like those are good opportunities to show that the character has learned something or grown. And in this case, it was just, they did it for 5 seconds, and that was enough. Like, why did he learn it at that moment? Why did it suddenly kick in? There didn't seem to be any reason other than enough time had elapsed. So I didn't like that. I think that could have been connected to something else, or if they wanted it to be time-based, like we need to do this for a minute, they could have used it as a ticking clock or something. I think there was a missed opportunity there. And then overall, I didn't understand the power level of the different characters, of the different Lokis. In particular, the Loki we're familiar with from the movies. We see him stop a building falling on him and throwing it back up into the air. So it's like he has this huge power, apparently. Why can't he just use that power to knock people away from him or trying to catch him or kill him? It's like, no, he's doing like hand-to-hand combat with people. It's one of the problems they have with like a lot of the later Star Wars stuff. The more power you give the Jedi, the more you're wondering why they're ever, engaged in any kind of close combat when they could just lift someone off the ground. It kind of felt like the same thing here. What power does he have? Before it was kind of enchantment and illusion, it seemed, and now it's like he can throw a building off of him. So that seemed to kind of come out of nowhere, and again, break some of the rules they had set up, or at least make it not understandable why he had any kind of challenge fighting any of these other normal people. And then overall, I think I was a little disappointed in the main Loki character, and just we didn't seem to get much of a plan from him. It seemed to be more about what's her name, Sylvie. Was that her name?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So it seemed like she was the one driving it more. Where it's like he was kind of saying he had a plan, but he didn't really have a plan most of the time, and most of his plans were kind of half baked, which undermined his character a little bit from the movies. I guess it didn't bother me too much because the show was cleverly called Loki, and the opening title sequence has Loki spelled out in all these different symbols and letter types and things like that, because it's not just about this Loki, it's about Loki as more of like a concept and a character across dimensions. So it didn't bother me too much, but I did notice that it's like it seemed like they tweaked his character a little bit. Before, he was so driven and you never give up, and he was always scheming and hatching and one step ahead of people. And it seems like here he was constantly one-upped by some of the other characters. But overall, I liked it, and I'm not sure how you would adjust that. I guess you could have more specific plans and just have them fail. You know, there's a lot going on. There's plenty of reasons it could fail. That was just something I noticed. Anyway, of me yakking. Is there anything that you saw that you would improve, or some other way that you would have handled something?
All your observations are fantastic. A lot of them, it's funny because I made similar observations, but I would then just sort of like, well, we have a season 2 coming, so maybe they'll fix it there. So I'm like willing to kind of put it off for maybe that this is a clever, undone thread that they're going to do up really neatly in season 2 or beyond. Who knows? Anyway, so I think all of your comments are really well taken, especially the one about Loki and his plans. The sense I got from that was, when you look at Loki, yeah, he's got a lot of plans, but they all seem to fail. Sooner or later, Loki's plans all fail.
Right. They specifically mention that in the show, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we get to see that with the TVA about how when he's taken to the TVA, he is so horribly outmatched by this bureaucracy that he keeps trying his usual plans, and they're failing spectacularly, or even not spectacularly, just consistently. And they fail until he realizes that the timekeepers, which is what his goal was to get to the timekeepers and somehow take over the TVA and get into a position of power, which is always his goal. That's when he kind of started following Sylvie, I think. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's true. It seems like from the writing perspective, that's what they were setting up, right? It was self-aware. He's a schemer, he's a plotter, but he does fail, right? Even the other ones were saying that. It's like that's what we do. We fail, apparently. And maybe it's a matter of him thinking he's more clever than he is, because he has these abilities that other people don't have, right? He's overestimating himself. That could very well be the case. But and also it's like I wanted him to be more proactive and the driver of the story, whereas it was another Loki who was more driving the story, right? Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's Loki as a concept than necessarily this Loki, even though this is the Loki we've latched onto the movies.
Yeah.
So it was a risky decision. I thought it worked. I still enjoyed the show throughout.
Yes. Well, the only thing that I actually made note of for this was the very last episode. We have so much action, so many twists and turns, so much wonderful peeling back of layers. And then the last episode, we have a whole lot of exposition by Kang. We're just sitting in office chairs, listening to him. And it was surprising me that just the change of the pace. The rest of the series, the pace was so good and so consistent. And then all of a sudden, we just stop and listen to this guy talk. It didn't keep the great pace that the rest of the series had enjoyed. And it seemed unnecessary. There must have been a different way of doing that.
Yeah,
I would
that
think.
is a good note. I mean, again, that sort of that whole episode is kind of a twist, right? It's like, oh, here, who's behind this, or what is behind this, and then find out, oh, it's this character who has, at least according to him, and protecting the timeline from all the other versions of him who are much worse. That's a great concept, and kind of see that. Did you see the Marvel What If show?
Yes.
And we kind of see that there, right? He's in that as well.
Yes.
I remember right. It's interesting, but yeah, you're right. It's just, him telling his plan that helped for most of that episode, and then it's interesting, and he's a great actor. He pulls it off really well and makes it fun to watch.
I think I would have liked for them to have used his acting skills a little bit more effectively to do something a little bit more action oriented.
Yeah, a little more dynamic.
Yeah, dynamic. That's a good.
Yeah, I agree with that, because they're just the two Lokis standing there. Almost felt, from an acting perspective, awkward. Like, okay, we're just standing here. What do we do?
Yeah.
I didn't really think about that until you brought it up.
And that was a scene that did not feel consistent to their characters. Standing around and sitting around is not what Lokis do.
Right.
And the rest of it I thought was really interesting. What was going on with Judge Renslayer was really interesting. What was going on with Mobius was really interesting. That was, I thought those, interspersing all of that was really fascinating. But then just sitting in the office chairs across a desk, it didn't work, which was a shame because the rest of the series did so good. And and I'm not entirely sure. I did not sit down and kind of think out about how I would have built in this exposition scene, because it was necessary, obviously, so that they understood what the stakes were. And I'm not entirely sure how that might have been different. But I would have liked it to have been different.
Yeah, because you're right. You need to get the information across, obviously. I think they kind of tried with like the little gizmo that he had that was showing the various versions of him. It felt kind of like the same thing in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 when Ego was explaining what happened in the past. Sort of the same scene, right? It's like, I tell you about what's going on, and then I have these little, mannequin representations of what was happening. It's like the same thing. But at least in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, that wasn't the end of the movie. Wasn't the climactic scene. It was just sort of information along the way. So yeah, you're right. That is interesting. I don't know how else you would do that. You'd have to rethink that scene a bit, I think.
Yeah. So both the Lokis would be trying to get a position of power in that scene. The guy behind the desk, by definition, is in the position of power. And both of them would be trying to see how they could maneuver or manipulate to get the power switched. Now, they had just come together as partners, but their partnership is fragile. And that was one of the things that was really good in that scene, is that Kang recognized the fragility of that partnership and he went right for it and to try to split them apart. I think maybe more of that. It would have been really cool if he had done his exposition while they were fighting.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. There was a good setup for that. The other thing I was thinking, as they were going into this citadel, given like if I was Loki and I had Loki's powers, I know, okay, I'm coming into this situation where I don't know what's going on here. I know that whoever's here is immensely powerful. First thing I would do is the very Loki thing of cast an image of me going in there instead of me myself going in there, right? If there's any kind of traps or someone's going to kill you immediately, they're going to kill a hologram and not you. I was kind of expecting that, and then we never got any of that. She was sort of out of character for her. Maybe she's not familiar with doing that, but he could have done it.
I think you're absolutely right, because we do want to see these tricks. We do know they have the powers. We want them to have their powers, on full alert. And maybe, he casts a projection and then the projection is stopped by Kang's power. Then we get another, and then it would echo exactly what happens to him in the TVA. He keeps trying to use his bag of tricks and it's not working. And so I think if we had that happen as he was going into the Citadel, we would get that mirror of how he was failing in trying to fight the TVA. Because essentially the TVA is an extension of Kang's power. So it would have been kind of cool to have that kind of continuity.
Right. Yeah, like he's always one step ahead of everyone because he's seen everything.
Right, exactly.
And also, I mean, that brings up another point. Sylvie, she could have tried to enchant him, right? She could have just tried to touch him to see, is he telling the truth? Maybe that would have been a good time for some visual exposition where she gets to see through his eyes what's going on, and then she's faced with the terror or with the existential horror of what could potentially happen, and then she has to decide: do I believe that, or is this another trick?
Yeah, that would have been cool too. Yeah. So, as an author, what are your final takeaways from season 1 of Loki?
I think for me, the big takeaway is try to keep the story engaging, like you said, so it doesn't become predictable. To try to have twists, turns, unexpected directions that the story can take. If it's that kind of story, if this is the kind of thing that you want to write, keep it interesting. Otherwise, you can end up with a generic feeling, by the numbers kind of story. For me, that was the biggest thing. How about you?
I have a similar thought. It's about just being aware of and consistent with the pacing, careful not to draw out or shorten any very important steps in the story. And it's possible to do that. It can happen when you get a forest for the trees thing, right? You're too close to it. You're not seeing, you need to take the step back and look at the pacing, look at the consistency, look at, are you spending enough time in this place? Are you not spending enough time in that place? And get that 30,000 foot look to make sure that it's consistent throughout.
I agree.
We thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Loki Season 1. A big thank you to our Patreon and YouTube and podcast supporters and all of our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are in the show notes. Join us next time as we discuss the story told in the novel Don't Date the Haunted and interview its author, C. Ray Dark. Thanks, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as well.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.